Every Wednesday from 2 p.m.
You can forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown.
94.1 FM, 3WBC is inviting you to join us
every Wednesday from 2 p.m.
for Downtown,
Every Wednesday from 2 p.m.
a program of podcasts, guest interviews, competitions, music and fun. So we hope you can be with us
Every Wednesday from 2 p.m.
for Downtown.
You can forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown.
Every Wednesday from 2 p.m.
You can forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown.
94.1 FM, 3WBC is inviting you to join us
every Wednesday.
Jimmy Morcos, Managing Director, Principal Lawyer, Morcos Law Group. And it's at level 35, 477 Collins Street, Melbourne, Victoria, 3000. Jimmy Morcos is a highly respected legal profession with over 20 years of national and multinational experience. Contributes to various boards and organisations, reflecting his commitment to community and corporate governance. Excellent at guiding businesses and individuals through complex legal matters. Today, we are speaking to Jimmy about the Australian Senate Upper House. Hi and welcome to 3WBC 94.1 FM Downtown. Now, Jimmy, I just said back in 2020, the Australian federal budget included $6 million allocated for an exhibition about Australia's voting system, installed in the Museum of Australian Democracy at the old Parliament House. 6 years on, we just had our 2026 federal budget outlined. The question I have for you, sir, is do we need a refresher course with a new and vibrant outreach public education program on how the Australian Senate works?
Firstly, Jerry, thank you for having me on. Really appreciate having this discussion with you. Always lovely having discussions with you. And it's a real privilege to have to comment about this. So my thoughts in relation to a new public education program is that yes, from a constitutional and civic education perspective, there is a strong argument for renewed public education on the role of the Senate. So as you know, many Australians understandably focus on the House of Representatives because that's where the government is formed. Okay. However, with the Senate performs a separate and critically important constitutional function. So as you know, the Senate's primary role is to review legislation. It is to scrutinise government decision-making, examine proposed laws through, committee inquiries, and hold the executive accountable. So the Senate committees are amongst the most effective, I guess, mechanisms for accountability within the Australian parliamentary system. And that allows for expert evidence. It allows for, public submissions, stakeholder participation, and detailed scrutiny, of bills and government conduct. There is a... Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to add on, because on election day, let's just focus on the great election, as you've outlined, Jimmy. On election day, Australians cast their vote for their lower house representatives, and some of us end up buying a sausage sizzle and a coffee.
Yeah.
Additionally, we are asked to cast our vote for the upper house, the Senate. My question for you, sir, is shouldn't we allocate 1 day specifically for choosing our lower house representative and then possibly shift the election for the Senate some 6 months down the track when everything is settled with the lower house?
Yeah, well, look, I guess pegging it back, Jerry, so there is a broader concern that many members of the public are unaware of avenues available to influence public policy, outside of general elections. so the greater public and their understanding of these processes will likely improve democratic participation and institutional trust. So I guess my commentary here is that constitutionally, the Senate was intended to represent state interests within the federal system.
Yep.
So, however, in practice, modern party discipline often results in the senators voting in accordance with public policy rather than independently advancing state-based interests.
Yep.
So I think it's important to clarify that the Senate's powers derived from the Australian Constitution, which was, as you know, established at the time of Federation. While there's there is an argument that these things need to be done, from the time of election, with all these discussions need to be had at time of election, and education needs to be put forward in that regard. Does that sort of answer your question in that
Yes,
in that aspect?
yes. I was trying to pinpoint the fact that we should, because we should be separating the two from the lower house one day, the upper house one day, so that we have more focus, as you've outlined, more focus on who we actually voting for. A lot of us don't vote below the line, as we are told to, if we want to do that.
Well, it's a good point, Jerry, and there is a legitimate constitutional and policy argument in favour of considering separate election cycles for the House of Representatives and the Senate. I think we've read. I'm sure you're well read in this area, and there is discussions in regards to that. Presently, though, and it's really, I underline this: Australians elect both houses on the same day. Which that essentially reduces focus on the Senate's distinct constitutional role.
Correct.
And it encourages straight ticket or party line voting behaviour. And I think you and I have had this discussion previously. So the Senate ballot papers are often lengthy, they're complex, particularly where voters, elect below the line. Many voters may not fully appreciate the significance of the Senate vote or the preference application process. So holding the Senate election separately, for example, several months after a lower house election, I think, Jerry, it may encourage greater scrutiny of Senate candidates. It may reinforce its role as a house of review, may promote more informed voting, reduce the tendency for Senate outcomes to simply reflect the political momentum of the lower house, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's going to. However, there are certain, practical and constitutional considerations. If we're going to go down that pathway, and it will increase. There's no doubt it's going to increase election costs. There will be voter fatigue. So I think just generally voters don't want to, go back to the ballot and the booths and vote over and over. It may prolong political campaigning and the potential for ongoing political instability, and that's a real big concern. And I can understand why it's combined on that basis. So any proposal for
Sorry, I was just going to say on 2 points, and I think we're so used to these days. We have by-elections, we have local elections. The constituents are not really concerned about having another day to go and vote. That's I think they can buy another sausage sizzle and get away with it. But I just think that if we go back to the basic, and that is, let's have more education about how powerful the senates are, and then make sure that they get the powers that they deserve. And like we've discussed before, on having to scrutinise the bills. I want to move on to.
Well,
Yes, sorry, go on.
Yeah. I was going to say no doubt, Jerry, and I think there really needs to be. We're in 2026, and there may need to be utilisation of better technologies that can better inform the general public.
Yeah, I look, there's I'm sure you're aware, there's the Parliamentary Education Office, which is a website, and
Yes.
I don't belong to any of the schools, and I'm retired, and I think I missed the boat in getting the education. But if I can just say that we go back to this, the power in that
Yeah.
the Senate's function is to review and scrutinise the bills through a committee system. And we talked about do we see or do we understand that the senators are impartial? This is the thing where the Senate owes its power to the Australian Constitution. The Senate themselves are politicians and are subject to strict party discipline, meaning they almost always vote along party lines. And so I go back to the question, are senators impartial?
Um, okay, so look, I'm gonna put my lawyer's hat on,
Yep,
Jerry, for a second,
yep,
and I guess my response will be a real conservative response here. And anyone in this position of power,
yep,
ultimately they need to understand that there is a more pressing issue of their civic understanding rather than, I guess the electoral timing of this. So the Senate's constitutional purpose is to review, is to scrutinise, and where necessary, restrain executive power. So public understanding of that function
yep,
is obviously essential. So we've established that to
yes,
maintaining, healthy parliamentary democracy. But those that are in this position of power or elected in the Senate need to know where their barriers are, where they can work within.
yep,
And we have seen, I guess, played out in public over the past, few years that there has been crossovers,
yep,
and that's been concerning, and particularly concerning again for a lawyer that I've been practicing, as you mentioned, Jerry, for 20 years,
yep,
and I have my understanding is that anyone that holds a particular duty needs to fall within their strict, duties within the limitation of their duties, and that's really, really important.
Could I just go to the last question, and I'm sorry if I've taken too much of your time.
No
Each of
worries.
Jimmy, each of the House of Representatives looks after 100,000 in their constituents in their federal courts. So the lower house, 100,000 to their own boundaries. However, a senator looks after 200,000. Currently, we have 76 senators. That's 12 from each of the 6 states and 2 from each of the territory. And as we know, Australian population is reaching about 28 million. Yay! Hence, we would need, if we divide the 28 million by the 200,000, we really need 140 senators. That's just twice as much senators that we have. 76, we need the 140 if we do the calculations according to what is being figured out. Should we increase the number of senators in the upper house from 76 to 140?
It's a really good question. Uh, I would I would say yes. I think based on this it is a legitimate argument that Australia should periodically review, and I'm going to say review whether the current number of senators remains appropriate for a growing population and an increasingly complex government environment. Okay, so that's my view of this.
Yep.
As you mentioned, Jerry, the Senate was designed to represent state interests and provide careful scrutiny of legislation.
Yep.
And as the Australian population continues to increase, the additional it's actually it's natural that additional senators could improve representation and oversight capacity. So it will improve the committee committee participation as well as allow greater regional, representation. It could strengthen legislative scrutiny and provide broader public access to elected representatives. So, you know, there obviously that comes with a caveat of certain considerations. There, I can recall there is a certain section in the Constitution where the House of Representatives must, as nearly as practicable, be twice the number of senators. I can't remember where it was. I think it may be section 24 or something like that, that it's mentioned in there. So accordingly, increased senators would likely require a corresponding increase in the members of the House of Representatives. So that there may be a technical argument there.
Right.
But as you know, and I think I've also read this, that their critics on that issue have argued that increasing parliamentarian numbers could, it's going to obviously increase public expenditure. There's no doubt about it. And given the environment that we're entering into in this day and age with inflation and what have you, it may be, frowned upon. It's going to create, a greater bureaucratic complexity. So that's undoubtedly, and it may risk, a diminishing efficiency if not accompanied by a meaningful structural reform. So that there will need to be, a real reform if we were to go down that pathway as to how it's going to be, fully managed and coherent. So it's not a real simple question or an answer to a question. But any proposal, Jerry, to significantly expand the Senate representation will ultimately require a bipartisan political support. And careful, constitutional consideration, as I mentioned before.
Okay. Jimmy, thank you ever so much. Sincerely, thank you for your fantastic cover on the Senate. And I really sincerely say that. Jimmy Morcos, Managing Director, Principal Lawyer, Morcos Law Group. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jerry. Lovely to speak to you as always. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.